Welcome, everybody, to the local hour. Big Suey's already out. Hope you're enjoying that. David Samson joins us today, as he does most Thursdays. David, thank you for your time. Last night, particularly down here in South Florida, there was a local story that caused a stir, but really in the continent of North America, as more details came out about this Blackhawks sexual assault story that's out there that we covered yesterday with Mark Lazarus, which I implore you to check out in our archive. John Doe revealed himself in a TSN interview as Kyle Beach, a former Chicago Blackhawk that was sexually assaulted by an assistant coach on the Chicago Blackhawks staff in 2010. And it's a 20-minute interview, and I was forever changed after watching this interview that Rick Westhead conducted with Kyle Beach.
Humanized it, right? Just really the hurt, the damage, the pain. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, Dan, I knew it was bad, right? I knew it was really bad, but to hear a victim so bravely relive his trauma and deal with the fact that the actions and inaction of the Chicago Blackhawks and every single person that was in that meeting, one of which is the current head coach of the Florida Panthers, who's the second winningest head coach in the history of that sport. I'm heartbroken. I'm heartbroken for Kyle Beach. And what happened last night when this interview dropped 20 minutes before puck drop, before the Bruins and Panthers game happened last night, that's Joel Quenneville should not have been coaching the second that investigation came out.
Can I stop you for just a second before you get, because I can hear you and you've been this way this morning. You're going to get quickly too angry. So because you're at the crossroads of some of the stuff we've been talking about lately, separating people from their actions and sports people from things they've done in the past, can you root for Deshaun Watson if he's your quarterback? We just had this conversation last week with David Samson. You couldn't watch the Panthers, the 7-0 Panthers that you've been waiting your entire life. You interned for the Panthers your entire life for them to be this kind of good. You couldn't watch last night's game because of how, when you say you were forever moved by this last night, this was sexual abuse reaching you emotionally through sports.
Yeah. This isn't necessarily apples to apples with the Deshaun Watson thing. The Deshaun Watson thing, there's still allegations. It's murky as to whether any criminal activity happened. There was a conviction with this. This coach assaulted a minor. He wouldn't have assaulted a minor if someone in that meeting said something. It's disgusting. I'm going to play sound so you can hear Kyle Beach in his own words. Maybe it moves you the way that it moved me last night watching it. This is courtesy of TSN.
The only way I can describe it is that I felt sick. I felt sick to my stomach. I reported this, and I was made aware that it made it all the way up the chain of command by Doc Gary, and nothing happened. It was like his life was the same as it was the day before, the same every day. And then when they won, to see him paraded around, lifting the cup at the parade, at the team pictures, at the celebrations, it made me feel like nothing. It made me feel like I didn't exist. It made me feel that I wasn't important. And it made me feel like that he was in the right and I was wrong. And that's also what Doc Gary told me, was that it was my fault because I put myself in that situation. And the combination of these and him being paraded around, them letting him take the Stanley Cup to a high school with kids after they knew what had happened, there's no words to describe it.
It's Kyle Beach who revealed himself as John Doe, the victim of Brad Aldrich's sexual assault, one of the victims.
That's hard to do, not just putting your name on it and getting out there, but having to relive it again in front of, like, this secret, this pain in front of everybody. That's difficult to do.
Let me bring in David Samson on this discussion before we dissect the actual residuals from this specific controversy. I'd like for you to weigh in on the Kyle Beach story and the Chicago Blackhawks story that happened in 2010.
So the first thing I'll say is that you're saying that this gets to you, and I understand, and it should, But I hope it got to you in the same way that the USA Gymnastics scandal would get to you, when the victims were meant to feel wrong, when these girls who had been assaulted by Larry Nassar, et cetera. Sexual assault doesn't just happen to girls. It happens to boys. It happens to men. It happens to women. And what the common thread here is that there is a desire to win that is far greater in sports, a desire to be great and win the ultimate prize, whether it's the Stanley Cup or gold medals, that is far greater than any one individual trauma that can occur. And the cover-up that you're seeing here with the Blackhawks, the only reason why any of this came to light and why Quenneville has a problem is that it got to the point where we are in this country where they could not hide from it anymore, and now they have to deal with the fallout, whether it's 11 years later or whether it's 5 years later or the next day. And so I respect how everyone is reacting to Kyle Beach and giving him the credit and understanding the heartbreak in this. But I think it's important to understand that it didn't have to get to this point. And it only did because in the sports world, we value, and I was never a part of a scandal like this at all. But I can tell you that when you run a team and you're on your way to a Stanley Cup, you don't care what is being thrown at you like the jackass grocery cart going down in the first scene of that movie. You are just going forward. And what you're reacting to, your visceral anger, is how could a team continue to go forward and try to win when this is hanging over their head or when they know they did this? Because that's what the Panthers did last night, right? They are going for a Stanley Cup themselves. They don't want to be distracted by this.
I mean, distracted, right? This as a distraction seems a bit flimsy, but I understand what he's saying because he articulated this from the corporate world last week. In sports, no distractions, no moralities, no anything. The thing that matters the most is get to the winning, get to the business of winning, and it clouds everything. And now one of the great names in hockey and the coach and leader of the most exciting Panther team we've ever had down here, he's in legitimate peril here. His job is in legitimate peril, and the way that last night was handled was embarrassing, where he was protected as if he were a victim.
Before we get into that aspect, I want to frame everything by Kyle Beach speaking specifically about Coach Q here, because he was asked in this TSN interview about what to do with the Winnipeg Jets GM Shovel Dayoff and Coach Quenneville, who's obviously in charge of the only 7-0 team in hockey right now. I want you to hear Kyle Beach in his own words and then get back to me on how you feel about Coach Q coaching last night.
I think that the step the Blackhawks took yesterday is a great step in the right direction. They accepted accountability and they took actions necessary, albeit too late. And the denials until yesterday, I commend them for what they did. Part of this process, I'm not sure what it was, 3 or 4 months ago, the NHL denied an investigation. They wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't want to touch it. US Safe Sport also denied doing an investigation. Now, in statements that came out in the release, Stan Bowman has quoted Joel Quenneville saying, and this is not a quote, this is my words, but saying that the playoffs and the Stanley Cup playoffs and trying to win a Stanley Cup was more important than sexual assault. And I can't believe that. As a human being, I cannot believe that, and I cannot accept that. I've witnessed meetings right after I reported it to James Gary that were held in Joel Quenneville's office. There is absolutely no way that he can deny knowing it. And there is absolutely no way that Stan Bowman would make up a quote like that to somebody that served his organization and his team so well.
David, such a damaging witness, right? Because after an offseason of denials that we can now hear in the heartbreak of his voice, oh, wait, this dude was feeling alone and reliving it again the last 4 months because these people are denying that anything wrong happened here. And Quenneville is out there publicly denying it. And now this investigation reveals, and this heartbreaking voice reveals, oh, no, Quenneville was in the middle of that.
So what Quenneville was betting on, and that's a bet that generally is going to hit, is that John Doe would never identify him or herself and that there would be no public continuing conversation about this. What Kyle Beach did was so brave, but it also ended Quenneville's coaching career. So the Panthers have no choice. They're going to be forced to let him go. He'll say that he resigned, and it'll be 1 minute before he gets fired, but he will not be coaching the Panthers. He can't be, because Gary Bettman now has been backed into a corner. And the reason why leagues deny it and teams deny it is that we always want to believe that not only are we bigger than the law, but we want to believe that people who love our sport and love our team and love the fact that we're trying to win will forgive all sins. But now there's a longer list of sins that are becoming unforgivable finally in the world of sports. And this goes on in the world of politics as well, and in the corporate world as well. And so what the denial is the way that we always are told to go, because there's never going to be proof. No one's going to talk about it. Just sweep it under the rug. But now today, there's no more sweeping. And the Panthers are caught up in it, and the Winnipeg Jets are caught up in it with their general manager as well.
You rarely hear this from me. I'm not the guy who does this, but you can't fire him fast enough. Like,
They should have fired him before last night. And before we get into the disastrous decision and inaction from the Florida Panthers organization and the NHL, quite frankly, and Quenneville himself, for him to be on that bench last night in the wake of this is a disgrace. I'm kind of guilty of the same thing, too. I was out here with the rest of you yesterday wondering what happens to Quenneville. Does he get suspended? And I look back on just the conversations that we had last week where we were exploring fandom and the human condition and do you root for your team if Deshaun Watson is the quarterback? It takes, much like, look, in our audience, maybe COVID wasn't real to a lot of people until it touched their family. And then you personalize it. It's how we view things through our own prism. And you mentioned the Larry Nassar scandal. This affected me because I love rooting for Coach Q's team. I love Coach Q. I feel like he turned the franchise around. And to hear that he could have stopped what, in my mind, if you just follow statistics, was probably multiple assaults that we don't even know about, by just acting on something, by saying something. This isn't even Deshaun Watson, because this was his player. This was a coach on his staff. As a head coach, I know there's a chain of command in that organization, and he wasn't necessarily running it with an iron fist, but that's your player, man. You got to protect him. You got to say something. You can't have that guy celebrating. You can't have that guy in your locker room. You can't have that guy celebrating. He took the cup to a high school, man.
I quite frankly was surprised to see him at practice, let alone the game. And it seems like the Panthers are trying to follow the league in this situation. They're waiting for a decision today as far as what they're going to do with Joel Quenneville. And if you want to be proactive in this situation, you should have done something before practice yesterday.
Let me make something abundantly clear in no uncertain terms. Coach Quenneville's a monster, if this is true. And there was an investigation that tells us he knew about it. We have Kyle Beach saying he knew about it. We have Quenneville a few months back saying he didn't know about it. The very worst, Quenneville's a liar. Like that's a best case scenario. He empowered a monster that has done harm to several victims now. Their lives are forever changed. I know this is new ground for the Florida Panthers. Many in that front office have no life experience in this. The NHL should have done a better job of leading. I know Quenneville was slated to meet with the commissioner today. That meeting should have happened before the result of the investigation came out. It is disgusting.
Dave, are even organizations that you imagine are well run? Because I can imagine this arriving in Quenneville's office and none of them having any idea what to do with it for whatever the reasons are, and then acting the way that they acted. And I can also imagine the NHL and the Panthers looking around and being like, who's going to lead here on this? What are we supposed to do? We don't know what to do. Somebody handle this.
Do you recall what happened with the Trevor Bauer incident? And Dave Roberts, the manager of the Dodgers, had him scheduled to pitch on Sunday and said, hey, he's going to pitch until I hear something different. And then all of a sudden the league stepped up and suspended him and put him on administrative leave. I think you are missing what actually goes on in front offices, where there is total reckless disregard toward anything that's coming at them that has worldwide implications, that has implications that could hurt people or hurt fans, because they're so tunnel visioned Of course they're waiting for the NHL to do it. It's not that the Panthers don't know what to do. I don't want to say that because I know Vinny Viola and Matt Caldwell, and I'm not willing to say that they don't appreciate and understand what went on here, but they don't want to have to face the reality that they are being swept up in something that happened 11 years ago to a different organization. They know their coach. They feel their coach has moved on from this. They feel like they made the right hire, and they've got a good team. Don't underestimate. If the Panthers were 1-6-1, he would have met the media. He would have been fired way faster, but they're dealing with a 7-0 team with a chance to win the cup that the Panthers haven't had here
same
since
culture.
1996.
Same culture.
That's the same exact bullshit rationalization that the Chicago Blackhawks were guilty of. I'm excited that the Panthers are good too. And it's a normal fan behavior to take that into account. It cannot. You're guilty of replicating that same exact logic that got the Blackhawks in there the first place.
Yes. You're exactly right.
You mean to tell me that it's not easy for the Panthers front office to tell Andrew Burnett to lead practice and to coach the game instead of Joel Quenneville, to tell Joel Quenneville to stay home? It's not easy for the front office to do that?
No, it's not for most front offices. Now, I'd be different, right? When Ozzy had the Fidel Castro situation, it became very clear what I had to do after speaking to one person to familiarize myself with that sort of third rail. But when it comes to sexual assault or racism or misogyny or homophobia or any of the other things that are now third rail items that didn't used to be, it's got to be very clear to a front office, even if it's not clear to an almost octogenarian owner.
Can you explain, David, and this is a bit of a labyrinth here for you, based on last week's conversation where we were interested in the corporate machinations around Deshaun Watson, there wasn't a whole lot of, from this group, because there's not a victim on television sobbing and making you feel it, from this group, we were talking about the corporate mechanics of it, and it didn't feel as indignant as this does, as we talked coldly about, well, Deshaun Watson innocent until proven guilty and investigation and blah, blah, blah. But sexual abuse is sexual abuse, correct? And can you explain to us the difference in tone between our show today being, hey, you got to get rid of Quenneville, what's everyone waiting for? And last week we were discussing the mechanics of, well, can you sign Deshaun Watson?
It's like a teeter-totter, right? It gets to a point, I call it the inflection point. I actually discussed this exactly on yesterday's Nothing Personal or today's Nothing Personal, where now it's just too much. The weight of what's happening and the number of organizations involved with some of these assaults, with the way that people are being treated, with the way players are acting, with the way coaches are acting, it got to a point now where you as a fan, and Mike, you are doing something, you're exhibiting something that as a president of a team, I look at you, and I'm trying to separate myself and think about, from the Marlins standpoint, when I'm running that team, if we had an issue with a coach doing this or our manager doing that, would I have fired that manager immediately if that had been something he had done 10 years or 11 years ago with a different team? And the answer is I would have waited too back then, because that's what I was like. I didn't care about anything else other than trying to win a game. And the reason why the Panthers had him coach last night is because they were holding on to the possible hope that the NHL was going to absolve him. They were holding on to the hope that Kyle Beach would have his moment. He would get to talk about what he did. He would identify himself, but that then there'd be another crisis, another story, another assault where they would somehow, there's a chance to escape. And that is what a front office looks for. Will there be a moment? It just happened with Jacksonville and Urban Oscar Mayer, by the way, where they went on to the next issue. And that's what front offices hope for.
Forgive me, I should have said that in the Deshaun Watson case, there were two women who came forward and were emotional. I was not aware of that. There wasn't quite this kind of reveal where you go from John Doe investigation to the courage immediately shown, where you've got sobbing, heartbreaking audio of a guy revealing himself who is now getting a measure of justice because some of the people who wronged him, he's going to get them fired. Like Quenneville will not survive the shame of this. And this isn't Paterno, but the shame of this is something that will end Quenneville as his name in the sport.
And I feel bad for the victims of Deshaun Watson that there's just sort of a news value to it, that it's an intangible. We just don't know. But David, I want to get back to that culture that you talked about, because you're talking about that in the present day. But going back to 2010, when this first happened, after the Blackhawks won the Western Conference Finals, it was an hour after they won the Western Conference Finals, and they decide just throw it under the rug. I don't understand why it's for people who are so insignificant. And it's the same thing with the Larry Nassar situation. He's just a doctor, right? Like, this is just a video coach. Like, for the sake of a player, why you wouldn't just completely toss aside? You know what? If anything, he's the one that's being detrimental to the winning, not the story, not you finding out. He's the one that's being detrimental to winning. Get rid of him. I don't understand why these insignificant people are being caped up for in such a way when they're so easily dispensable. Why is the culture such that the first instinct is we need to protect our image here? It's not we need to protect our people. It's about image. It's about all this other stuff. I can't fathom it for a video coach. Why is this guy being protected, getting more jobs after the fact? Because that's the part that Kyle Beach was most emotional about, is he went to work for USA Hockey. He went to go work for a high school where he then, sexually assaulted a 16-year-old. And that's how this whole story began. It's infuriating that people are protected this much by organizational culture.
I don't know that I can possibly overestimate when I articulate this thought. Inside a clubhouse and inside a front office of a professional sports team, it is so male-dominated. It is so unfriendly to women, to people who show any sign of weakness. That is why there's so much homophobia in professional sports, because the level of testosterone, the way things go on inside a clubhouse, you believe that you are insulated from any laws of the land. You believe that you're above it all. You believe that any victim shaming is a Tuesday. That is just what goes on inside a clubhouse, where either you don't believe someone when they complain, or if you do believe them, you don't care because they deserve it. There was a movie about this called A Few Good Men, right? Where people were being picked on until they died in the code red, right? That is exactly what clubhouses are like. It's this fraternity of men who believe that if you can't keep up, it's like the Serengeti. If you're abused, that's because you're weak. That's because you deserve it, not because there's a coach who's a monster or a predator. That is not uncommon to exist in clubhouses. And the question is, does it still exist today? And I'm sorry to say it does. The biggest difference is that now there's a sensitivity, not just for fans, but in the general media, with social media, et cetera, that makes accountability easier and faster to come by, which forces action by leagues and teams.
And this type of abuse, this type of toxicity happens in this sport of hockey. It's happened to Theo Fleury. It happened to Daniel Carcillo. Racism and sexual assaults have happened in this sport, and it's not changing. It's like it's going to take 3 generations for all this to be erased in this sport.
Roy,
and it needs to change.
Roy, it's not at all surprising that hockey is inept at handling something like this, given its toxic culture. They're in terms of all the sports, and this is not an excuse, but in terms of all the major sports, they are far lagging behind on all social issues, on all sexual assault issues, on all assault issues. So that's not an excuse for what happened when you find out one of your players was molested and assaulted by one of your coaches. There is no excuse for this. I cannot fathom being so singular-minded, so focused on a piece of hardware that you discard one of your players. I want to bring it back to something that Chris Whittingham said, because something that you mentioned about the newsiness of the Deshaun Watson thing compared to this didn't necessarily land right with me. I think that the reason why I'm internalizing this one different is, with Deshaun Watson, we're still in discovery, right? We're still trying to find out what exactly happened. Now, there are mountains of allegations when it comes to Deshaun Watson, but here at least we know there's a conviction. We know Aldrich did this. So that's why this one landed a bit differently for me, but I'm curious what you meant with the newsiness.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of the overall details of, as Dan mentioned, it's a John Doe becoming a victim, bearing his soul. But these women in the Deshaun Watson case also bared their soul. they also expose themselves for criticism and reliving an incident and all of the things that are the same part of being a victim. And yet, Dan, you weren't even aware that it happened. I barely remembered that it happened. And I don't know why. And Mike, one of your, it's certainly a fair point, the notion that it's an accusation, not a proven crime. But still, we should have received that same information in precisely the same way. Unfortunately, we did not, and we have not yet. And that's a fault of ours. And that's, I think, a larger part of what we're talking about is, believing victims and fighting for victims first and foremost. We think about them first, not about the people who are committing these acts and their trade value or their value to an organization. But unfortunately, that one just didn't have the same impact that this interview last night did, where I'm feeling exactly the same way. I'm a Panthers fan. I'm appalled that that Joel Quenneville coached last night. I'm appalled that he's in any way involved in the Panthers organization, and they're relying upon the commissioner of the league to take this out of their hands.
And Dan and David, I don't know if you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, which is like regret at how I've processed the entire Deshaun Watson thing, because I have this.
Go back further, though. You got to go back further, because I'll let you finish in a second. But now you got to go through USA Gymnastics, and now you got to go through Penn State again. So because these things need humanizing, right? And sometimes it's a guy or a tough hockey player blubbering on the screen, or sometimes it's Simone Biles. And both of them ought to reach us the same way. But Sandusky, we've been figuring this out. Like, there have been a whole bunch of Paternos and Quennevilles and old people trying to figure this out, not knowing how to speak about any of this stuff, because all of it's because basically change and societal awareness has spoken these things into existence. We're talking about them now.
Bo Schembechler, another recent one that hasn't received much coverage. And I think this is human, us learning through this. I have my regrets about kind of getting caught up in the just transaction of Deshaun Watson and the fascinating conversation of what an organization does, and losing sight perhaps somewhat of the victims and the fact that this could happen again if you don't take action, David.
Yeah, it's not knowing. I want to clarify, Dan, something. It's not that the people you mentioned didn't know that something was wrong. It's not caring. So I want to make that subtle difference, if you don't mind, because people do know the difference between right and wrong. They just make a decision what they want to act on and whether or not the level of wrong is enough to interrupt their routine and their flow of their team and what they're trying to do. I'm not going to ever think that Joe Paterno thought that it was fine what was happening. He didn't care because he had a team to run and games to win. I don't want to believe that Quenneville in his mind said, hey, it's great that Kyle Beach is being assaulted. I don't believe he thought that. What I do believe he thought is, don't bother me with this because it's not significant enough in order for me to vary from my appointed course.
I don't know how someone like Joe Paterno, like, we've learned all of this together, right? We've been watching this in sports. The Paterno scandal was the greatest sports scandal of our lifetime, bar none. It knocked down a coach who was an icon, a pillar, integrity at an institution that mattered during a time when America was symbolically great and Joe Pa was a leader of men, a general. Either not equipped. I don't know if he didn't care or wasn't equipped. Like, this has been, I don't know what happened with Joe Paterno. I know that I will not trust a 90-year-old man or a 70-year-old man or an 80-year-old man who's a football coach to be equipped, no matter how legendary, to know how to deal with this kind of stuff. Like, all of us can look at what happened with Paterno now and say, of course, you simply fire Sandusky and report it to the authorities. But so Joe Paterno went from saintly figure who simply didn't care about pedophilia. Like, I have a hard time making that leap. Somewhere within there, I want to think that Joe Paterno just was not fundamentally equipped to know how to deal with that problem, because he was an old man from another time with God who didn't talk in the house about sex stuff.
Right. Well, I think it shouldn't have been the coach. It shouldn't have fallen upon Joe Paterno. I think some of that lets Joe Paterno off. You'd like to think if anyone were in that position, regardless of how singularly focused they are and how much of a football caveman they are, can understand the human aspect of this. This is a 20-year-old at the time that you have brought up to make a contribution to your team. At the base of it, it's a human being, man. It's a human being.
Mike, what are you saying? Are you saying that Paterno gets to be excused, but
No.
Quenneville doesn't?
No, I'm saying that what Dan mentioned there, people can read into excuses. I don't think any.
But I'm not excusing
I'm not
anybody.
excusing
I'm just
anybody.
when you say to yourself, "How does this happen?" Right? You say, "How does this happen?" Is a man who's standing there that you have thought all your life represents one thing. He's just evil.
But it's just
He's
the
simply
group
evil.
thing.
He's consciously choosing. He's consciously saying to himself, Stanley Cup is more important than whatever damage this is going to do to one of my players.
But
The-
Dan,
Yes.
if you read those reports, Paterno knew about that when he was way younger. Then it wasn't 70, 80, 90. This was going
Buddy,
back to the late
but
70s.
Let it be made clear, I am not excusing or defending any of this
No, I
stuff.
know.
I'm trying to understand how you can be a leader of men who's respected throughout the universe and do the most evil thing, the weakest thing, the least leading thing on a moral case that seems to be the easiest one of all time. I'm trying to understand it.
I like exploring that too because there's groupthink, there's chain of command here, there's stigma, there is shame for everybody involved. They're inequipped to handle this. There are reasons why this happened. None of them certainly outweigh actually doing something about it, though, David. But even you yourself mentioned if you were in the position in 2010, you might have made the same call that the Florida Panthers made last night.
Yeah, so when you say doing something, if you ask Paterno whether he did something, he would say, yes, I did. I said, stop it. And Quenneville probably said, if you could just stop doing that, and I got a game to coach right now, and we got a Stanley Cup to win. And that was dealing with it. And that to them is enough. And what was enough in 2010 may not be enough in 2021. The question we have to ask ourselves is, are these things still happening? Is sexual assault and pedophilia, is it still happening? And the answer is yes. So it can't be that people don't know how bad it is or how evil it is. The only common thread that can exist from those days into these days is the common thread of purpose where winning counts greater than any individual victim.
But David,
that is the only
and,
explanation.
well, then you're never going to change it, though. Like if that's
yes.
the culture, Jesus Christ,
That's what he's
David,
saying, yeah.
Like, then it
That's
can't
what
be
I'm saying.
changed from there. If when USA Gymnastics, when all of those girls come out talking about Nasser, what you end up having is them feeling a pressure from the institution to protect the institution at every turn and becoming victims again and again. Like at every turn that doesn't change. How the hell are you going to change any of that? Is that what Roy's saying? 3 generations removed from change on sexual abuse on this stuff?
Way more, Roy, right? Because if you hire a head of diversity and inclusion, all of a sudden that means it's all good. There's no more racism. Everyone's following the Rooney Rule and the Seelig Rule because we've got people in charge now to make sure that minorities are being interviewed or hired or treated well. It's a bunch of horse hockey. It's all done to try to appease you as a fan or broadcasters or sponsors, but it's not changing the issue with minorities and racism or pedophilia or misogyny or homophobia. It exists today the way it existed 30, 50, and 80 years ago.
And that's what the NHL actually did. They actually had a panel to discuss such things. But this has been going on for decades.
Hockey has, yes, the hockey pipeline is corroded and corrosive.
And before we switch gears, Kyle Beach articulated just a couple of months ago, nobody wanted anything to do with this, and they weren't believing him. I'm glad there was change. It's instances like this that bring about change. I was reading a horrific story from earlier this month where a woman was raped on a train. Like, the act was being committed, and there were bystanders there, and they did nothing. There is
You mean like the accused with Jodie Foster from 30 years ago?
Yeah, there are psychological things that should be dissected when it comes to this, and I'm ill-equipped to talk about why there is inaction there. I like to think in that moment, though, I say something. Even if it's as bullshit or rationalization as saying it's just a freaking video coordinator. Guys, I just don't understand how you could know, like, one of your players who's really just a kid coming to you and you doing nothing.
But David, doesn't it speak to the culture? If you're so ingrained in this particular pipeline, where this pipeline, young people in hockey are perpetually abused. Like, we know this. This isn't any kind of secret. They've been coming out for years saying this system damaged me of coming through this pipeline. If that's what you come up through with all its brainwashings and its teachings, isn't that where you're going to end up? Well, one of the things that happens in hockey is some kids get abused and we move past it and it's another distraction and adversity and we try to get to the Stanley Cup.
Boy, that sounds just like what happens with priests, doesn't it?
So that's where we are. Like, it's just so ingrained in the fabric of the culture that, of course, it's going to happen. That Quenneville's not alone. He's just the one we got. He's the one.
That's what we're doing.
But that
we're
room,
now in
but
a
that
society
room-
where we got people.
But that
You've been
room.
gotten.
But what you're saying, is if I keep going around hockey and filling that room and that conundrum in 2010 or 2021 with hockey executives as they're behind on every progressive issue, that'll just keep happening. We just got Quenneville, but if I played the math on this, what you're saying is if you come up through this culture, you're going to be brainwashed to think the Stanley Cup it's worth more. Hey, some kids are going to get damaged along the way. It's going to happen.
You sound like you're having an epiphany right now.
I mean,
Is
that's
that
fair.
possible?
It's fair. Like I said, you view things through your own prism, and things lap upon your shores that have previously, and this one just hits. And this one, for me right now, is connecting. Let's awkwardly switch gears to Roger Goodell's painful press conference. A lot of commissioners have been weighing in on things, and we'll get to your Manfred opinion, too, because he had something as well. We're going to speak to an attorney that represents 40 former Washington football team employees that's already pushing back on the notion that they need protecting. And Roger Goodell was holding that up in his press conference as to why there wasn't more revealed to the press. It seemed like another disastrous Roger Goodell press conference. In part, that's where he makes his salary, to be the bad guy in the face of these things. Your take on what happened there?
Well, I think what he meant to say is we're protecting the owners, right? He said we're protecting the victims, but I think he just misspoke because in his mind, he needs this issue to go away as quickly as possible because there are so many instances of this same thing happening where more coaches or even owners, God forbid, will have to take the fall, and his job is to protect them. And the problem with Roger Goodell and the entire NFL, so you say it's just hockey, which was strange that you thought that this only goes on in hockey because they're so behind. This is an NFL and an MLB and an NBA issue as well. So I don't know why that you rank hockey in that way.
No,
But
I'm saying child abuse in hockey is a known thing in a way that it's not in the other sports. The athletes getting sexually abused, it's gymnastics and hockey. You don't hear and you don't hear it as much in tennis very much, but these young people entering these cults, it happens in these sports younger than it does in the others. That's the reason I made the distinction.
Isn't it true because those sports have the pipelines that start with younger kids and younger kids? So maybe we have to look at any sport. I mean, it can't be MLB because there's no, you have to look at Little League, and that's not necessarily associated. But what I want to mention about Roger Goodell and what struck me about what he did yesterday when he was talking about Deshaun Watson and talking about WFT, it feels like he's willing to die on the hill with these 650,000 emails. And the question you have to ask yourself, and Congress is asking it right now, if he is willing to die on that hill, that means there is something on the hill that is worth dying for. Because otherwise, it's so easy to deal with this issue. You invite in the attorney for these women. You open up and you give to Mark Davis and everybody else all of the emails, and you make it public. And the reason why you don't make something public is not for precedent. It's because there's something to hide. And so Roger Goodell is now in a rock and a hard place because the people he works for have been very clear. These emails, we cannot let them out. That's why they're not going to give them to Congress unless they're subpoenaed, and they're not going to give them to this lawyer who you're going to have on. It's never going to happen.
David, if you're the commissioner of a sport, excuse me, it's $5. If you're commissioner of a sport, do you stop protecting the people that are writing your paychecks?
Never.
Ever?
Ever. You got money to make.
I know, but there's no scenario.
You work for them.
No, I know you work for them. I realize that. But when is it like you're sitting there as a human being and saying, you know what? I got to do the right thing here. I'm bailing on the owners.
Let me bring it to a personal. I worked for Jeffrey Lurie, right? He was the owner, and complicated family relationship and everything else, nepotism, whatever you want to say. Would there be a point where I would, because he had done something or said something, that I would separate myself or throw him under the bus the way Bowman threw McDonough under the bus, by the way, that we didn't talk about. The president of the Blackhawks got thrown under the bus by the GM, Stan Bowman. And the answer is never. I would just resign. and I'm not going to resign when I've got guaranteed money left on my contract.
What did you want to say about Bowman?
Well, if you saw his statement, it was disgraceful. What the Blackhawks GM in his statement said, hey, I went to the president, I told him about it, and that was the end. I did my job, and I wish I had known that he wasn't going to do anything, because then I would have done something at the time. But that's a bunch of crap, right? When you are hearing something in a position of power as president or GM of a team, you have a responsibility to deal with the human resources issue, notwithstanding the fact that you're not going to deal with it and you're not going to fire anyone or get rid of the video coordinator or believe the victim at all. But you then can't say 11 years later, hey, it wasn't my issue at all. When you are at the top, it is your issue. And whether you want to bury your head in the sand, that's your business. And that's what we do. But don't say what Bowman said, because that's the end of his career as a GM.
I thought what was so devastating about the interview with Kyle Beach last night was that he said he was sorry for the victim in Michigan because he didn't do more to protect that person who's a stranger to him. Whereas, like David just said, Stan Bowman still hasn't even said that he's sorry. The only person in this entire situation who has shown any courage, bravery, or spine is the victim. And that, to me, was devastating to hear.
It's also common, unfortunately, right? Think about it. That is what we find in all of these scandals, is that the victims end up apologizing for not doing more, not saying it sooner. And that happened with the Harvey Weinstein, right? People saying, I can't believe I didn't say anything when he was treating and acting with actresses the way he was. So I'm not sure that is anything other than common and privilege.
The Washington football team, what do you imagine? I don't know whether you have thought of how it is that we get at that scenario, swallowing John Gruden because somebody leaked something, and then all of a sudden, okay, nothing to see here. We're not going to see any more of these emails. Our commissioner is going to be putting his face on, you know what? Nope, there's going to be no paper trail here. $5 million on Ted Wells and a deflated football, but no proof here of anything. Like, how do you do that? How do you make that leap?
That's exactly how you do it. That is the playbook of how to deal with these sort of scandals or these blank gates, which is what they've all come to be called. And the reason why you do that is, I said it before, and I just want to repeat it one more time in the show. You're waiting for the next scandal. That is what we're taught, is that you batten down the hatches. You don't say anything that you can't unsay. You don't let the toothpaste out of the tube, and you wait for the end of the news cycle, and you hope that you don't get swept up in the tornado. That's what you pray for.
Are you saying that the NFL leaked Gruden to the Wall Street Journal in order?
Yeah.
What?
Guaranteed. It's not even close. And the irony is, Roger Goodell said, we wouldn't leak that. Why would that be in our best interest to leak it? Are you kidding me? The owners would tell you to leak it because they need someone to be the fall guy. And what they didn't count on is it wouldn't be enough. They didn't go high enough.
Just to be clear, you are alleging...
Sports are gross.
Just to be clear, you are alleging that the Washington investigation that now protects Snyder, led by a commissioner who works for these owners and doesn't actually want to do anything other than protect him and the check they pay him to get out here and be the boob for them so that none of them have to take these arrows. You're saying that Goodell or one of his emissaries calls the Wall Street Journal and orders a hit on Gruden, and then comes out a week later after the fallout of that and just says, and you'll see no paperwork on the rest of this investigation. You're saying that that's how that happened?
I guarantee it. Page 2 of the playbook.
One last thing before we let David Samson, host of Nothing Personal, follow him on Twitter at David P. Samson. Before we let you go, I'd like for you to weigh in on what Rob Manfred said about the controversial tomahawk chop that the Atlanta Braves fans and other fans across sports do. He was touting the regional sensibilities of Atlanta as opposed to the cultural sensibilities of those that may be offended by it.
That is just bad preparation by your PR guy. You know you're going to be asked in a scrum. Now, if the Braves weren't in the World Series, it wouldn't have come up, right? The Cleveland Guardians didn't come up in the pregame scrum. So he's asked, Rob Manfred meets the media, which is what you do before game one. He's asked about the chop in Atlanta, and he says, hey, listen, I don't think you understand. We have 30 different markets. We're a regional game, and what's good for the goose may not be good for the gander, But we know that the Native American community in Atlanta is all good with the chop. Therefore, we're all good with it. And I'm watching this happen, and I'm saying it's a matter of time before a statement is released by the Gander saying that you've got it wrong with the goose. And the statement came out today saying, I don't know what you're talking about, Rob. Regionalization, the World Series is broadcast to countries and cities around this country and around this world, and Native Americans everywhere are not happy with the chop, even in Atlanta. But that is Rob trying to not have anything take away from the World Series. No distractions. Let's not talk about anything negative. It's what the football owners did with WFT. Woody Johnson said, hey, I'm just going to talk about football. I'm here to talk about football, and that's it. Don't bother me with any of this sexual assault or any of this racism and harassment. It's, again, that's page 1 of the playbook. Don't let anything distract from on-field product.
You want the playbook, don't you?
Were you watching, I do want the playbook, but were you watching Manfred and thinking to yourself, Rob, again, you're unprepared for an interview? Like, again?
It's incredible. You'd think that after his interview with you that he would never be unprepared again. He's got good people around him. And I felt so badly for him because when you're standing in a scrum, you can't escape because they've surrounded you. It's not like you can just say, no, I'm not going to answer that. And what he did is he regurgitated this answer about regionalization because that was his way of starting the process of answering the ratings question. When the ratings are down and all the other things that are happening in baseball, you get to explain it with regionalization. That's the word we were always taught to use in baseball, as opposed to the NFL when you can't use that word because it's such a national sport. So all of it sort of goes together, but he really stepped in it, and that issue's not going to go away.
David, it's just so ridiculous that we're worried about white Atlanteans. Man, I did it again. Atlantans? I'm not. It's ATLians. Over the people that are actually offended here. Let's once again awkwardly, king of the awkward transitions. Let's do your movie review for the week.
So I'm reviewing something called Dear Evan Hansen, which was a play, a great musical, a Tony Award-winning musical that was made into a movie starring Ben Platt, who actually reprised his role and won a Tony for his role. And it's with Amy Adams and Julianne Moore. And it's an example of a movie that is trying to capitalize on the world and America that doesn't get to go to a Broadway musical, that has heard of it and says, I'm going to go see the movie because I can't get to New York. And if I do, I can't afford to go to a Broadway musical. And it missed so badly. And I love Dear Evan Hansen. Absolutely love it. The movie itself didn't work, because they cast Ben Platt. It's about a high schooler, and it's about being bullied. It's about someone who doesn't belong. It's about a kid who will lie in order to feel as though he belongs, and then when you lie once, you lie again and again and again, and I'm somewhat versed in that. And you feel as though that you can't stop once you start. And it's the story of a young boy in high school who has to lie to make it as though he is popular. And it doesn't end well. And it is a very difficult subject matter, actually. But the movie did not do a good enough job of recreating the play. And I want to compare that to Come From Away or Hamilton, which were made into movies, except it was just the Broadway play shown on the movie screen. It would have been far better to just show Dear Evan Hansen as it was produced on Broadway versus trying to make it into a movie. It did not work.
Did I misunderstand you? What spoke to you about the centerpiece of you get stuck in a lie and you got to keep lying?
Aren't we out of time?
Okay, very good. I thought that was that was too revealing. Too revealing by you.
Listen, the bottom line, Dan, is that when you this happens with kids all the time, and it's something that I have not necessarily grown out of, which is when I take a position, it's hard for me to back off that position, even when the facts would indicate that I should. Even when I know I'm wrong about something, sometimes I will argue it to the point just because I don't want to give up or give in or to show weakness. And that's a trait of a child. And I have not matured, even though I am old and privileged and white. I have not gotten enough sort of self-actualization or realization that sometimes you're just wrong, and it's better to own it quickly than it is to keep doubling down.
It's on page 1, Dan.
What are you nodding your head yes about,
I've
Mike,
learned this
as the
recently.
guy who hates to admit he's wrong about anything?
I hope you've noticed a sea change, Dan. I hope you've noticed that I'm getting better at admitting when I was wrong.
What? When?
With Lamar Jackson, with Justin Herbert, with this story, with Deshaun Watson. I'm leaning into the fact that we're fallible, certainly, and able to learn from our mistakes. I think it's a sign of growth, and I'm leaning in on that.
All right, very
Proud of
good.
you.
This is inspirational, life changing. Good work, Mike. Thanks. You got here a little late.
You're
but
welcome,
thanks.
everybody.
David, thank you. We appreciate
But
your
I
time,
reserve
sir.
the right to shit all over Justin Herbert if he craps
One
him
bad
in
game,
in the
one bad
playoffs.
game. I will be right back here.